Hey everyone, welcome to this DeFi Nation interview. I'm Clayton, I'm the head of DeFi with Mosendo. We're here with Tom Howard, who is the CSO of Mosendo.
Hey, DeFi Nation, how you doing?
Right on. And we're joined here with Allison Liu, who is the COO and co-founder of UMA. So,
Hi, everyone.
why don't you tell us just a little overview of what UMA is?
Sure. Thanks for having me here. So UMA is an open source, decentralized financial contracts platform. What we build is financial infrastructure for the Ethereum blockchain. Specifically, two kinds of financial infrastructure. One that is smart contract templates that really easily lets people create decentralized financial products. And the other, which is a truly decentralized oracle that lets people effectively and efficiently value those financial contracts.
Wow, okay. So let's focus on that first one for a minute. I'm curious if you can give me a few examples of what these financial templates look like, or maybe a few products that are live right now.
Yeah, sure. So actually, our first template that we've released, audited, and actually used on the Ethereum mainnet is called Tokenized Derivative. It's basically a contract that lets you synthetically tokenize into the ERC20 standard anything that has a price. What I mean is that you can basically create a token and collateralize it using real digital assets and have that token's value actually track the price index of something else. So on the Ethereum mainnet in Q1 and Q2 of this year, actually, some of our partners used this template, plugged in the price feed for a major US stock index, and created a token that actually tracks the value of that US stock index so that people on the Ethereum blockchain, without having to leave the crypto community, could buy tokens that tracked US stocks.
Okay, so basically, as long as there's a reliable oracle that's feeding information about price to your system, you have a system basically that's going to have a token whose value will track the value of that non-blockchain asset, potentially non-blockchain asset. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So the two requirements are a reliable price index that you want to use and liquidity. And it's super flexible, actually. So it can actually be literally anything with a price, anything with a value. So it could be cross-chain asset price indices. It could be the total market cap of crypto. It could be off-chain assets, real-world assets, or it could even be completely arbitrary things. Like we could track, for example, the number of followers that CZ has on Twitter, or the number of Instagram likes that a particular post receives.
So in that latter example, I guess it slips from me because are you saying the price of the token would be the number of followers that CZ has?
Sure, you could. I mean, financial engineering and financial structuring is actually a really, really creative endeavor. You can create pretty interesting, unique financial products. So, for example, right, like nobody's gone ahead and created this, but you could create a token whose value increases by $1 for every new Twitter follower that CZ receives. But due to the magic of financial engineering, it doesn't have to be $1 per follower. It could be $10 per follower, or 1 RMB per follower, or any sort of complex or simple formula that you can think of.
I see. And when you said that bit about so it requires a reliable source of price, of course, and then you said it requires liquidity. Do you mean liquidity in the sense of people holding that synthetic asset, or is it liquidity of the underlying asset?
Yeah, so the answer actually, the assumption that you made, they're kind of actually related in the answer. What I mean there is what we create, our first template is basically a derivative where there's one person who's long and one person who's short. So in the CZ Twitter follower example, there's one person who would be going long the number of followers that CZ has, and they would own the token. And there'd be somebody else who would be providing that short exposure, somebody who's willing to say, no, I don't think that CZ is going to get more followers. I think he's actually going to get less. So you need liquidity from that person to provide the financial risk. One way by which that liquidity can be fostered would be if there was already real world liquidity that existed. So there is no CZ tracking index in the real world, so it'd be really, really hard to actually hedge that product. But there are a lot of, for example, other real world assets like the S&P 500 or gold or crude oil, where somebody could provide this type of exposure on the blockchain and use liquidity from the real world to offset the other side.
Okay, so in order for these assets to be effective, you need to have people that are essentially interested in trading them on a marketplace. Is that the right way of thinking about it? Okay. So in the case of CZ, like might not make a lot of sense, or maybe people would get really excited about it and want to like predict these things, right?
Right,
It just sort of
exactly.
depends on that. And then, but the easiest way to create a synthetic is just when there's already real world liquidity on a marketplace that you can essentially, I mean, there's already a marketplace of people interested in trading that asset. So it would be pretty easy to have that poured over to your system.
Yeah, so when our partners used our infrastructure to create the US stocks token earlier this year, part of the reason why they chose that particular product is because, of course, they thought there was a market for it, that they wanted to be able to give people in crypto access to the underlying price index. But another major consideration was that it would be really, really, really easy to hedge and scale up because of the size of the liquidity in the fiat world. Personally, though, I actually think a lot of the more interesting innovation is likely to actually come from either new interesting structures that don't exist yet in the regular world, or new interesting, new interesting kind of crypto native use cases or price indices that people actually want to trade in crypto, at least in the near term.
I see. And can you tell us a bit about the S&P 500 one? My understanding was that there was news about it, and has it gone live? Is it something that people can use right now, or what's the situation there?
Yeah, it was live until Q2 earlier this year. And then our partners ended up deciding to deprecate and not relist that particular token, although they could relist it again and spin it up again anytime. What happened was the total margin locked inside the contract actually grew to be pretty significant. It grew to be about 1 million DAI at its peak. But the reason, the way that it actually traded is it traded very little on exchanges, and it traded mostly OTC, or over the counter, kind of peer to peer. The reason for this is, our partners basically recognize this demand for a US stock index tracking token, had identified some people that wanted this exposure. And they created it not just for them, but for the public crypto markets as a way of evaluating demand. It turns out that while there was a handful of individual trading partners that wanted this exposure for some period of time, that the overall crypto market demand, it was there, but it was quite small. And so if you think about like why it's small, it's not like a structural, it's not exactly a structural issue, but the issue was just that, crypto is a very new industry. Most of the people that are in crypto because of the volatility, right? They want the 10x return over the next month. And, US stock indices are not going to do a 10x return in the next month. As a result, demand within the current crypto ecosystem of crypto traders for a US stock index tracking token was quite tepid, and it was just early. I think that when I look ahead towards some of the initiatives that various companies are looking to do in terms of onboarding emerging market customers into crypto for the first time, or even hiding some of the crypto backend from the user and just giving them a delightful front-end experience, that's where I would see demand for stock index tracking products like this. But we're just a little bit early, and that user base is pretty small right now. And so that's why the partners decided to deprecate it.
I see. That makes sense to me. And that intuitively, that makes sense as well. I happen to have a little bit of the S&P in my IRA, and I'm pretty sure it's not outperforming my DeFi lending. Right? I don't think I'm getting like 12% like I am on DeFi lending. So I wouldn't rush over to like put my DAI into the S&P 500 token if I could either. So yeah, that makes sense. So you mentioned that you were excited for certain developments or certain potential use cases for UMA. Can you maybe paint a picture of what a couple of those might be? What is kind of your vision for the future of what could exist?
Yeah. I mean, as I said, the actual capability of these products is huge, right? Like whatever payoff structures that you can really imagine, you can use financial engineering to create. So as some examples of the types of projects that some of our partners are now working on, on developing.
Oh, we lost your audio, or I did. Tom, can you hear? I can't hear either of you. Uh-oh.
1, 2.
Oh, wait. Yeah, now you're back.
Okay, great. So starting over.
Yeah.
To give you a few examples of some of the product use cases that our partners are currently working on validating or doing user development in. Many of our partners continue to be really excited about the idea of bringing either cross-chain or off-chain assets in a synthetic form onto the blockchain. And most of those hypotheses center around giving people access. One of our partners is actually looking at sort of juicing the returns even more. It's funny, Clayton, that you mentioned that your DeFi lending yields are actually outperforming US stocks. Well, the funny thing is we can get the best of both worlds using financial engineering. So we can actually create a yield enhanced US stock index tracking token by using CDAI as collateral instead of straight up DAI. So if you use an asset that actually yields, what is it yielding these days? 10%, 12%?
Yeah, it's bouncing in that range. Yep.
Right. Let's just say 10% simple number. So if you use an asset that yields 10% as the collateral to create an S&P 500, tracking synthetic exposure, you can actually, decide of that 10% yield, who do you allocate that to? And you could potentially split that up between the person who's long and the person who's short. So the person who's long and owns this stock index tracking token could earn the return of that stock index plus, let's say, 8% as a kicker. And suddenly you have yield enhanced products that are created on the basis of funding differences in the crypto world versus the regular world. And suddenly this is actually a value prop that could not only be interesting to people within crypto, but potentially even bring new blood into crypto. Other stuff that we're really excited about. So we are also working with a couple of partners on creating synthetic stable coins in smaller soft currencies. So, the DAI stablecoin is obviously at the heart of DeFi, but it takes a lot of work to maintain an entire, dollar stablecoin system. You have not just the core infrastructure, but the trading liquidity, keeper systems, stability mechanisms, and governance. All this stuff. That whole shebang is a really high resource cost. For somebody who might want the stablecoin of some much smaller country or much smaller currency because they're trying to build some sort of like in-country payment app. So actually for you guys, right, if you're trying to facilitate a Vietnamese-based or Vietnam Dong-based, payment app, there's a few ways to do it. You can do it on your own ledgers. Like you can actually move DAI around, but track things in Dong on your own ledgers. Or you could potentially use our technology to convert DAI into Vietnamese Dong in the first place, and then move Dong tokens around between users. So we have a couple of people who are interested in using our technology for that. And it's all really actually the same flexible infrastructure that supports all of these different use cases.
Sure. And we've, yeah, Tom, go ahead.
That would be like essentially collateralizing VND with USD. So you're generating in the same way that Maker ETH creates USD,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Really interesting. So then you're taking like a long short position on either the USD or the VND.
Exactly. And everything actually, we're getting a bit deep into financial engineering, and I could talk about it for hours, so cut me off if I'm getting too in the weeds. But because of the beauty of financial engineering and funding rate differences, when DAI is yielding 10%, you can actually use that 10% yield to pay the liquidity provider on VND risk, to like basically use that to compensate them rather than have like end users compensate them. And it actually is kind of a special edge because dollar funding rates in the fiat world are like 2%, whereas dollar funding rates in the crypto world are like 10%.
This is amazing. Just blows my mind. So when you talked about people, so the first example you gave was people using CDAI as the collateral for a particular synthetic. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so we haven't talked exactly about how like collateral works in your construct. But as I understand it, people are going to be, let's say I put money into the S&P 500 and it's getting 6%, which is like kind of a reasonable expectation of a long-term return. What you're telling me is that I might be able to experience that benefit as well as maybe half of the interest rate on the DeFi lending. Is that the right way to think of it?
Yeah.
Wow. That's pretty phenomenal.
Yeah. So wouldn't it be cool if somebody created a crypto betterment where they guaranteed the return of betterment plus like a 5% kicker?
Sure.
Yeah. And, that kind of leads me to the third thing, which is we're really big on DeFi, kind of as a movement, and as a movement, as a community, as a hypothesis. And so a lot of the stuff that we work on and the way that we kind of think about the world and deploying new products and working with partners, we do think about and focus on DeFi composability, right? So these ideas of yield enhanced products could not exist if it wasn't for tokenization standards and the composability of all of these open source protocols.
Yes.
Which actually maybe leads me to one of the other things that we're really interested in continuing to explore. I already talked about funding a little bit, but interest rates are another kind of product area that we're really interested in fostering a marketplace around. I did a workshop on it a few weeks ago, which was really well received. It's posted in my Twitter if anybody wants to go back and look at it. But for some context here, in the fiat world, the notional value of fiat derivatives is over 500 trillion. And the vast, vast, vast majority of that notional is actually in interest rate swaps. And so if you look at DeFi, actually, right, like you've already talked about lending yields and lending having kind of been a killer use case that has taken off within DeFi. Well, these lending yields in DeFi right now are all very short-term yields, meaning they fluctuate all the time. They get reset all the time. Interest rate swaps are a way for you to smooth those out and basically swap out those short-term interest rate fluctuations for a long-term fixed interest rate. And what that would enable is, well, very simplistically, it would enable borrowers to be able to take out fixed rate term loans. But at a more kind of abstract level, the ability to transfer interest rate risk opens up the ability for borrowing and lending use cases that are non-speculative. If you buy a house and you want to take out a mortgage within DeFi, like you want to use a CDP to take out your mortgage or something like that, having your interest rate fluctuate from 0.5 to 20.5% in a year is pretty untenable.
Right.
But if you had access to a functional interest rate market, you could actually swap out all that fluctuation into a simple fixed rate loan. And right now, having these fluctuations is perfectly fine because, let's face it, most of the people borrowing in DeFi are doing so for speculative short-term purposes. But if we as a movement ever want to or believe that, you know, our whole industry will transition into and support additional use cases, then having a functional interest rate swaps market will actually be really, really important. So, you know, our protocol currently can support a limited amount of interest rate swap trading activity, and future templates, future developments, we will have an eye towards being able to support, you know, the full breadth of interest rate swaps related products.
That's super cool. Yeah, I mean, the interest rate swap market is massive, and it's quite healthy for the ecosystem. So I'm really excited to see something like that take off. There's two challenges that I think are a bit of an unknown for most folks, and the first challenge is like the data oracle problem. Like, how do you get a price feed from the real world, make sure that it's secure and decentralized? And then the other challenge is relating to one thing that you said, the tokenization of physical assets. So how do you open a CDP against, say, your house, get a loan against it? I know that Uma has been working on the price feed side of things. I don't know if you've been working on the tokenization of physical assets side of things, but I'm keen to hear your thoughts on how to solve or approach those problems.
Sure. So yeah, I'm definitely going to start off by addressing the first part of your question around the price feed or oracle issue. And maybe I'll start off by making a relatively bold and unusual claim. We believe that any on-chain oracle can be corrupted. And so this means that almost every DeFi protocol is actually at risk at some level of scale. And even if it's not risk due to malicious actors, it's a hell of a lot of work to try to keep all of these price feeds going at all the time, where the consequence of a failure means everybody loses their money. So the way that you know, we kind of think about this oracle problem, if you will, is, at least from if you have a lot of people using your DeFi protocol and locking up real digital assets into your smart contracts, that actually creates a honeypot for attackers. So let's say that there is $100 million of margin that's locked up in your smart contract. Well, that's potentially millions and millions of dollars that an attacker could earn if he could successfully corrupt your oracle. So what we've actually created at UMA is an oracle that has economic guarantees. And what that means is we basically define two things, we basically create a tokenized version of oracle voting rights. And anybody who owns our oracle voting rights has the right to participate in setting the settlement values of contracts that use our oracle. And it's a stake-based thing, so effectively the cost to corrupt our oracle is the cost of bribing or purchasing half of all voting rights. And so we can kind of actually use that to basically formally define the cost that it would take for an attacker to be successful, or the cost of corruption. On the other side of the equation, you have people using smart contracts and margin locked in these smart contracts, which creates a potential profit from corruption. What we basically have defined is a mechanism that ensures that the cost of corruption is higher than the profit of corruption, so that nobody has an incentive to cheat. The way we do this is we observe the cost of corruption, and if it's not high enough to guarantee the safety of our system, then we levy a tax, or really a dynamic fee, on users of the smart contracts and buy and burn voting rights until that safety threshold is reached again. So what we've created is basically a shelling point style game for determining oracle values, with an added economic guarantee to ensure the economic safety of any smart contract that's using our Oracle.
That's awesome. I love it. So I'm curious, what's live right now, and what can users use, or kind of what's the status of your project in that regard?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the way we thought about this problem is that, a decentralized Oracle is a core piece of infrastructure that a lot of different things can be built on top of. But it's really not useful unless things actually are built on top of it. So we decided to approach this problem from the smart contract side first. And we approached the problem by thinking about what kinds of templates and end product use cases are actually going to be useful for people right now. Start off by testing those in the actual marketplace as quickly as we possibly can and with as much of a variety as we possibly can. And then go back and retrofit it to a decentralized Oracle. So we actually built out our smart contract template first, tested that on the Ethereum mainnet with a centralized Oracle, and are working with our partners on a number of other proof of concepts for that core template. And then we actually went back and built this decentralized Oracle, which is still currently in testing on the Kovan testnet. We're looking for a mainnet launch of our decentralized Oracle towards Q4 of this year, or maybe early Q1 of next year.
Okay, nice. Sounds good. And Allison, I'm curious, kind of your background. It sounds pretty clear to me that you have a pretty good understanding of finance. So I'm guessing that you have some educational background in that regard. I'm also just curious, like, what motivated this particular business idea? Is it like you're into synthetics, and so I'm just curious, like, where did that come from? Has that been like a lifelong interest of yours, or?
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, my background comes from institutional finance. I was an interest rate swaps trader at Goldman throughout the entire financial crisis. I saw every single piece of extraordinary monetary policy that the US Federal Reserve ever enacted during this financial crisis, but I never saw a single rate hike. So I was there from 2009 to 2015, but being a technologist at heart, I decided to leave and in 2015 and join an early stage startup in California called Tala. That company is basically doing mobile-based digital lending to people in emerging market countries. So when I joined, we were only in Kenya, and now they are in Kenya, Philippines, Tanzania, Mexico, India, really all over the world. And in those two experiences, I felt like I really saw two extremes of the fiat financial system. I saw, the really highbrow institutional finance world of hedge funds and money managers. And then I also saw retail banking in emerging market, like really, really emerging market countries. Between those two experiences, I was pretty consistently frustrated by a lack of incentives alignment between the different participants in all of these ecosystems. And so I became enchanted with the idea of blockchain and being able to work on building a parallel financial system. But maybe more importantly than a parallel system or taking down the banks, I don't actually care about that. What I care more about is designing systems where people's incentives are actually aligned, where the users of a system are able to benefit from using the system and not be exploited by using the system. And so that's when I went down the crypto rabbit hole really hard. As I was doing that research, I took a look around in my personal network, realized that my co-founder Hart had just had his company get acquired as well, and he was also exploring very similar ideas. Hart and I had sat side by side for 5 years at Goldman before going off to do our own things. We always wanted to work together again. And so it was kind of a no-brainer for the two of us to put the team back together, given our similar interests.
Hold on a second. Your audio bumped out just again. Oh, maybe it's just my internet. I'll give it just a second. Try again.
Testing.
Okay. Yeah, I can hear you now. And I interrupted you maybe 5 seconds before it cut out. So it was just that bit.
Sure. I think I was just saying, went down the crypto rabbit hole hard, and my co-founder being interested in very similar things, we took a look around and decided that we really wanted to put the team back together. So we've been working on UMA for about the last year and a half. At first, it was just the two of us, and we raised a $4 million seed round last summer, and then started hiring people. We have 6 full-time employees now working on this project. In terms of why synthetics or why any of this stuff, so the way we came about this idea is looking at the history of financial innovation, and very quickly we get to derivatives. And we thought about what could be unique or uniquely enabled by putting derivatives on the blockchain. And that's cool and all, from like an intellectual perspective, from a product design perspective. But actually, I guess my personal way of coming into this project or coming into this industry was really more geared around the two things of incentives alignment and financial access and control. So we talked a bit about the incentives alignment bit. On the financial access and control side, it was just through my experiences of working with people, from all over the world, really, at both the institutional and at the retail level. It had always felt unfair to me that, I kind of won the birth lottery and had the opportunity to live in a country where I could access any kind of product, financial or not, from day one. And it just didn't seem right to me that, most people around the world lived without access to these products or access to education for these products. And so, our mission is right in our name. Actually, UMA stands for Universal Market Access. That's why I'm working on this company.
That's really nice. And I really like that name. I was going to ask you that next, is what was the meaning of UMA? And I'm very aligned with that vision. It's something that, as I'm researching for Mosendo and trying to understand the landscape, I always kind of come back to that, the lottery of where we were born and whether or not we can access finance. And just finance sounds like something that's sort of highbrow and distant from people's lives somehow, but it's not. It really is everyday things, right? And it's just wild that, for instance, there's 14% of the world doesn't have identification, so they can't access most formal financial services. And so I'm very, very vision aligned with you on that. And it's really nice to hear that. What also stands out for me is your background with the interest rate swaps, and what seems to be probably your experience with that and your ability to connect the crypto space with the traditional space. I think the more that we can do that, the more we can start to see mortgages on DeFi, for example. Like right now, it is centered a lot around speculation and around these crypto assets. But if we can start to see it more for use cases that appeal to people who are not hanging out in Telegram all day and are not crypto people, to do sort of real life things that are important to outside of the computer space, is when we can really empower DeFi to start to make these changes. So I'm really excited for that as well. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I think we can probably wrap up here in a minute, but Tom, did you have anything else that you wanted to ask Allison about?
No, that's all for me. It's a great overview, great to learn more about UMA and the future of what's possible with it. I'm excited for interest rate swaps.
Great. I mean, for the listeners, I have a bit of an ask. One, which is we'd love to hear from you around what kinds of products you think would be useful in crypto today. What kind of quirky, weird things would you like to see actually exist that you would actually trade, whether it's a CZ Twitter follower tracking token, or a US stock index tracking token. And then secondly, Clayton, you talked a little bit about how it seems like I try to bring this institutional financial content and contextualize it to crypto. And that actually is a lot of what I spend my time on, really. When I think about DeFi, right? The second word of that is finance. But most of the people in the space come from a pure technology and cryptography background. So I'd also love to understand, what kind of content would be helpful to people. How can I share, not me as the subject matter expert, but just the resources that I have, or the people that I know, or the books that I've read and vetted that I can recommend. I'd love to hear from the listeners on what kind of financial content would be useful to them.
Yeah, I love that. I've had to really do a lot of studying about finance. I have a background in economics, but the crypto and the DeFi space in particular have inspired me to look into that. So yeah, I really like that offer and that ask because I think that there's a lot of interest in that, but maybe people aren't really clear on where to get started. So I think that would be super useful. Well, cool. Thank you so much. Go ahead, Tom.
Too big of an ask, but is there one book that someone could read to get like kind of like a big picture of the global financial system?
Ooh.
like a good introductory. This is kind of this is the map of the territory, if you will.
I would be really hard pressed to find a good book that describes the current financial system and banking system as it stands today. But I can recommend a book that just gives really a 5,000-year history, actually, of banking and the financial system that I personally found really useful in understanding crypto and things like the MakerDAO system. That book is called Debt. It's by David Graeber, Graeber. It's pretty big, but it's a good read. It's an easy read. It basically just goes over the history of debt, specifically the history of debt money, and makes allusions towards the way that the banking system kind of emerged or developed out of that.
Awesome. I will personally check that out. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Allison. Really, really appreciated everything that you shared, and then look forward to hearing about new developments. Yeah, please keep us updated. Be happy to have you on again next time there's something new that you want to share about UMA.
Great. Thanks for having me.
I can't wait to use a Twitter follower-backed crypto asset.
Actually, Tom, you can create your own version on testnet starting next week.
Okay.
A little sneak peek maybe for your listeners, but we will be doing we've built a interface to really easily let developers, tinkerers, entrepreneurs interact with our core smart contract template. And as I mentioned, that template's really flexible. You can make tokens that basically create that track anything. So if you want to create that CZ tracking token, Tom, by all means, go for it. I'll send you the link next week.
Interesting. I wonder if I could use this to incentivize people to get me more followers on my own Twitter.
Yeah, that's called market manipulation, though.
It's only the underlying is only followers. It's Twitter followers. I think are unregulated space, right?
Yeah, that creates interesting incentives, doesn't it? That particular asset type.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Allison, and we'll talk soon. Okay.
All right. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Allison.